Welcome to this explainer. Ever stared at Chapter 2 of the DAGP Financial Audit Manual and just felt your eyes completely glaze over from the sheer volume of rules? Well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to completely change how you look at it. We're going to treat these audit standards exactly like building a house. Every single rule and standard is just another piece of the architecture, from pouring the deep foundation all the way up to the final inspection. So grab your hard hats because we're about to build an audit from the absolute ground up. Consider this our virtual classroom. Our main goal today is to make the Department of the Auditor General of Pakistan's Financial Audit Manual completely intuitive for you. We're going to strip away all that dense, complex jargon and look at the actual core logic behind the rules, so you understand exactly why they were written this way in the first place. Okay, let's dive into the structural roadmap. We've got 4 main phases today. First, the foundation, focusing on international standards. Second, the builder's character, meaning our general standards. Third, the construction process, which covers field standards. And finally, number 4, the final inspection, where we issue our reporting standards. Let's get right into Section 1, the foundation, the ISSAI standards hierarchy. Before any local audit team even thinks about stepping foot into a government office, we need a bedrock. The DAGP auditing standards are built directly upon the ISSAIs, the International Standards of Supreme Audit Institutions. Think of this as a 4-level pyramid. At level 1, the absolute deepest bedrock, we have the Lima Declaration from 1977, which is the founding principle calling for effective, independent audit institutions. Level 2 sets the prerequisites for exactly how an audit institution should function. Level 3 outlines the fundamental principles of public sector auditing. And finally, sitting right there at the top at level 4, we have the auditing guidelines. These are the highly specific operational guidelines that you are going to use on a daily basis. It builds perfectly from a grand global philosophy all the way up to your daily checklist, ensuring that a Pakistani audit holds the exact same weight and integrity on the global stage as any other. Okay, so we've poured our foundation, we have our structural rules rooted in international law, but honestly, a brilliant blueprint is completely useless without a qualified builder to execute it, which brings up a pretty critical question. Who exactly is the auditor? What kind of character is actually required to enforce these massive systemic rules? Let's pivot for a second and look at the person holding the clipboard. Section 2, the builder's character, general standards. Before you are ever allowed to step into the field, the manual requires a very strict checklist. To be an auditor, you must possess 4 fundamental traits: independence, objectivity and impartiality, competence, and due professional care. Missing even one of these, the entire integrity of your audit collapses. Let's look a little closer at a couple of these key traits. First up is independence. The manual defines this as absolute freedom from political influence, executive direction, and conflicts of interest. You literally cannot be pressured and you cannot have a vested interest in the entity you're auditing. But here is the real kicker. The manual explicitly states that independence must exist not just in fact, but also in appearance. For example, even if you could completely objectively audit a department run by your brother-in-law, the mere appearance of that conflict completely shatters public trust. You must be entirely above suspicion. And that perfectly illustrates our next point, straight out of the manual. Auditors must not undertake work they are not competent to perform and should exercise due professional care. So, having pure intentions and a neutral mindset, not gonna cut it. You need rigorous technical skill. If you're auditing a highly complex, computerized financial system, but you only really know basic accounting, you lack the competence for that specific job. You have to apply the absolute highest professional standards, meticulously documenting your work. That is what due professional care actually means in practice. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 3, the construction process, field standards. Now that we've got our solid foundation and a perfectly qualified builder, we finally reach the operational phase. Here's the chronological path of an audit out in the field. First, planning the audit so it's actually efficient. Second, proper supervision and review by senior staff. Third, evaluating the entity's internal control structure. And fourth, gathering evidence. Let's really zoom in on those last 2 steps, because honestly, that is where audits are won or lost. Now, this is a massive distinction in the manual that you absolutely must remember. Internal controls are the safety nets, the checks and balances an organization uses to prevent errors and fraud. But remember, it is management's job to build those safety nets. It is not your job to do management's homework for them. The auditor's job is simply to evaluate those safety nets, to test them, and see if they actually hold any weight. If the controls are strong, you can rely on them and reduce your detailed testing. But if they're weak, you have to dig much, much deeper. And what exactly are you digging for? Evidence. But you can't just accept anything they hand you. The manual dictates that to form an opinion, your audit evidence has to check 4 specific boxes. It must be competent, reliable, relevant, and reasonable. If an auditee gives you a verbal assurance that, hey, $1 million was spent correctly, that's neither reliable nor competent evidence. You need the original third-party receipts. The final conclusion of your entire audit depends entirely on the strength of this evidence.
Almost done building. Section 4, the final inspection, reporting standards and audit opinions.
Finally, the house is built and your evidence is fully gathered. This is the moment you formulate your official report for the public and for Parliament. When you look at those financial statements, you, as the auditor, have to give a final grade. According to the manual, you've got exactly 4 types of audit opinions you can issue: unqualified, qualified, adverse, and disclaimer. Let's break down what each of these actually represents in the real world. First up is the unqualified opinion. Now, despite the somewhat confusing name, this is actually the gold standard. It's the absolute best-case scenario. It means you, the auditor, are completely satisfied in all material respects. The financial statements are properly presented, they fully comply with the rules, and there are 0 hidden disasters. It's a completely clean bill of health. Now, what's really interesting about this next slide is how common this scenario is. The qualified opinion. You issue this when you find a disagreement or an uncertainty that is material, meaning yes, it's a big deal, but it is not fundamental to understanding the whole document. We often refer to this as the except for opinion. You're basically telling Parliament, hey, these financial statements are accurate and fair, except for this one specific department's inventory records. It isolates the problem without throwing the entire financial statement in the trash. But what if the problem is so big it can't be isolated? Well, that leads us right to the 2 worst-case scenarios. An adverse opinion is essentially the nuclear option. We are talking pervasive errors and actively misleading statements. The rules were just completely abandoned. A disclaimer of opinion, on the other hand, means you couldn't even do your job. Management refused to give you the documents, or maybe the records were destroyed in a fire. There's a complete lack of evidence, creating fundamental uncertainty, so you literally have to disclaim, meaning you refuse to give an opinion at all.
And that brings us to the end of our structural tour. From the deep ISSAI foundation, through the general standards of your own character, the rigorous fieldwork construction phase, all the way to that final opinion. Always remember this. Behind every single massive government budget, behind every single taxpayer-funded public project, is the integrity of an auditor signing their name to one of those 4 opinions. The responsibility resting on your shoulders is absolutely immense. So, as you head out into the field, which standard will you uphold today?